coming up now.
There we go. So Patrick, I'm just going to go ahead and get us started.
Okay, sounds good.
Great. So good morning, everyone. This is the Region 7 Stakeholder Advisory Committee meeting on Tuesday, August 9th. And my name's Leo Wilson, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our meeting. We've got Patrick and Desiree from Arundel County and the rest of our team here from the committee. We'll start by calling the meeting to order. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then we're going to open up for public comment. Patrick, do you see any members of the public in our waiting room? Or
we do have one. We have one attendee in the wings, and if that attendee is interested in speaking, maybe you can raise your hand now. Otherwise, let me see.
Okay, so
yeah, I think we
as
can move
I
forward.
mentioned during all of these meetings, the public is welcome to make comment at this point in our meetings or at any other point between meetings by just emailing us at region7@annearundelcounty.org. And if you go to our website, you'll find that all of the members are listed, and email contacts are given in that Region 7 document. So if you have any desire to make comment or want to add your input, there's some method for you to do so. Absent anyone asking to make comment at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close that. I don't see any hands up on my screen. Do you, Patrick, or Desiree?
I don't. Mm-mm.
Okay, fine. Then we'll go ahead and move past that and close that part. And then the next item on our agenda here is our old business, and it's approval of the meeting minutes. And they were sent around prior to this meeting, and I've had a chance to go through them. And I wonder if anyone would like to make a motion to either have any modifications to the meeting notes. We'll start with that. So I don't see anyone asking to make a modification to the notes. So what I'll need is a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
So moved, Larry.
A second, Tony.
Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. All in favor? Actually, if there's anyone opposed to approving minutes, can you just let us know right now? Seeing no dissension, we're going to go ahead and approve the meeting minutes as presented. And thank you, Desiree, for getting those together for us. Again, they're pretty comprehensive. So if there's any questions about what happened at the prior meeting, please refer back to these. They're well done. So, and then Patrick or Desiree, do we have any other old business we wanted to hit today?
I don't have anything. Do you? Can you think of anything, Desiree, that we're missing?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So then we'll go ahead and move into our discussion today. Just a couple of points I just wanted to mention, and Patrick and Desiree and I spoke, I guess it was yesterday. One of the things that's interesting about Region 7 is our interface with the City of Annapolis, and we all know this, that it's somewhat unique in terms of all the other regions. Our interface with pretty much Annapolis takes a large portion of what would have been in our region and provides their own direction to that. And so in the background information that was sent out, there was some nice information about the City of Annapolis, their comp plan and where they are with that. And there was specific information about what's happening with their housing program. Now, we weren't able to get it set up today, but we are going to have Eric Lashinsky from the city. We're hoping to have him join us in September. Is that right, Desiree? Is that what we talked about? Yeah. So we'll plug him back into the discussion, and that'll give us some more background on what the city's up to. But they're is it 2040 plan? Is that what it's called, Patrick?
Yeah, Annapolis Ahead 2040, I believe.
Yeah, so that document was in your background material, and it does give some pretty specific kind of benchmarks they're trying to hit in their housing program. And they seem to run parallel to some of the presentations we saw at our last meeting, but it'll be nice to hear from him on that and transportation and some of the other things that we're considering as we go through our process. So I just wanted to point that out. With that said, Patrick, I think I'll turn it back over to you to kind of start the discussion, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be good. I did want to start the discussion or kick off the discussion by, I do have a little bit of a presentation that I want to give you, primarily to refresh a bit about some of what was discussed last time, but more to give you a little bit of data related to Region 7 to help to keep in the back of your mind as we're going through and thinking through housing issues in the region. So if you give me 1 second, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that well enough?
Yeah, I
Yep.
can see that.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up my notes here. I'm operating with 3 screens here. So yeah, we wanted to have this extra meeting today to allow some space for you all to continue your discussion on what you learned from the July 26th meeting. And so I'll refresh your memory just very briefly on the presentations. If you looked at the meeting notes, that was a pretty comprehensive summary of what was discussed. But I do want to give you a little bit of region specific data and then ultimately open it up for you all to discuss. So our first presentation was Dan Pontius with the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, and he kind of set up a large regional context for the housing issue, including some of the factors that make homeownership more difficult for new buyers and help place upward pressure on rents in the region. Our second presenter was Karen McJunkin with Elm Street Communities, and she discussed some of the demand and supply factors from her perspective as a home builder in the county. The third presentation, Erin Karpowitz with Arundel Community Development Services, and she shared some of the information that she had on housing needs, particularly of low and very low income renters and homeowners in the county. And then finally, Steve Kai Ziegler, who is the planning and zoning officer for the county, and he shared the findings of a work group that's looking at adequate public facilities ordinances for schools and the impact on housing production in the county. So I do want to hear what you all think about some of the information that was shared. And if you have any additional questions for our speakers, let us know and we'll take notes and follow up with them. First, though, I was going to share a little bit about, so we've had a couple of public outreach opportunities thus far, a questionnaire that was put out earlier in the year, kind of a community survey, and then a feedback map that closed, I believe, about a month ago. We're going to share the results from, we'd already shared the questionnaire results with you all. We'll be sharing that feedback map with you all shortly, probably by the end of this week. But in terms of housing, just we're hearing some of the same things that we're hearing from you all, actually. A lot of people are expressing kind of love for their own neighborhoods and for their homes in particular. A lot of people note, though, that housing is expensive in the area and that they feel like we need more affordable housing and more housing variety in this region. And several comments that we got on the feedback map in particular noted opportunities for affordable housing in mixed use areas. And some people cited specific areas like the Bay Ridge commercial area could be a potential area for that. The Parole Town Center, of course, that reflects some of what I've heard from you all. And then just opportunities for, as we're redeveloping some retail areas where there are vacancies, are there opportunities to make sure that we're including affordable housing in some of those areas? And then we did get at least one comment that was that affordable and public housing really needs to be dispersed throughout the region and not concentrated in pockets or particular areas within the region. So I just wanted to share that with you as it relates to housing, some of what we're hearing from the public. A lot of this data has been shared with you. It was in the the visual vocabulary that we sent out, and also it's a lot of this is on the Region 7 hub site. The current population of the region, including the city, is over 75,000 people, and that represents a 6.2% change since 2010. And within the region, again, including the city, we have over 30,000 households, 30,400 households. And that there's been an increase of 5.6% since 2010 in the number of households. Now, these projections that you see here in households, we are projected to have about 1,500 new households by 2040. And again, that includes within the city. One of the things that we're working on in the background and we're hoping to have for you before we start our more intensive discussions with you all on land use is what's called a holding capacity model. This is being run by our GIS folks here in the Office of Planning and Zoning. And what that's going to look at is our current zoning capacity for development, and where does there remain capacity for additional density that's unrealized currently. So that analysis is going on in the background, and as soon as we have that, we will share that information with you all. I do want to point out the employment forecast as well for the region. It more or less tracks similarly to our population forecast, which I think is interesting when you compare with the other two regions that are going forward in regional planning now. Region 2, which includes the Fort Meade area, has a much higher employment forecast than population forecast, whereas Region 4, which is the Severna Park and Pasadena area, has a much lower employment forecast than population forecast. But you'll remember when the Economic Development Corporation came and presented to us, they noted that about 25% of the county's jobs are within Region 7. So that number becomes pretty important. In terms of housing types in our region, I just wanted to point out, now these data do not include the City of Annapolis. So just within the county portion, the majority of our housing types are single family detached homes. Over 55% are single family detached, and a large proportion of those were built before 1970. And again, this is without the City of Annapolis. In terms of housing tenure, renters tend to be more common in Region 7 than they are in the county. If you look at the first graph here, and renters in Region 7 are more likely than homeowners to be of a minority group when you look at the breakdown by race of homeownership and home renters. Again, these numbers do not include the City of Annapolis here. Home values, and these numbers, we're switching back to looking at Region 7 and including the city in these numbers. Home values within Region 7, the median tends to be about $100,000 above what you see countywide, versus median gross rent, pretty comparable, a little bit higher than countywide. But I think the home value is an interesting number to look at.
Patrick,
Yes.
I know the other Pat. On that number, it was 2019, and we know that things have changed so dramatically since then. It's almost an irrelevant number at this point, right?
Well, I do have those numbers for 2021. The median home value in the region is $491,000 at this point. I used these 2019 numbers because to compare the gross rent as well for what that's worth. So it was from the same data set.
So we don't have a new gross rent?
I don't have that, no.
Okay.
And then looking at building permits, this is kind of sporadic, but you'll see kind of a general decline over the last 20 years, and sort of similar to the trend that was pointed out for the larger region that the gentleman from the Baltimore Metropolitan Council had pointed out. So these are building permits over the last 20 years in our region. And so those are the data points that I wanted to share with you really quickly. Now, I'd shared in the background information, I won't go too deeply into this, but the goals and the policies from our Plan 2040 countywide plan, these really set the stage for a framework for the way that we think about housing and all of the topics that we're discussing in our region. And with regards to housing, a lot of these are really implemented at the countywide level when we talk about things like the strategies supporting affordable housing policies and programs or code enforcement. These are more countywide and set the framework for all of the regions. But a lot of the information from our last meeting will really be applicable, and we're going to be revisiting that more directly. Just after the new year, we're going to have a series of intensive meetings where we are crowded around maps and talking about land use and what kinds of uses need to be where in the region. So a lot of this is really going to come to bear at that point. But I do want you to keep some of these housing and housing needs at the top of your mind as we're going into those discussions. And I would like to hear, though, how you process the information that you heard from the last meeting. And I want to get some of your thoughts on some of the housing needs as you see them in the region now. And I'm thinking of things like senior housing needs, barriers to aging in place. What are the opportunities for different types of residential infill, needs for housing for the disabled, those kinds of things. You know, how do we feel about some of the tools that are set up in Plan 2040 and how to apply them in Region 7?
Patrick, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we go?
Sure.
I had a question and I was on mute and I didn't get a chance to stop you in time. Can we go
Okay.
back to back one slide, please?
This one.
Okay, so what we're hearing, and again, this may be very anecdotal and not factual, of course, but with the decline in 2019 through 2021, we're hearing that a lot of building permits were slowed simply because of the ability to manage them during COVID. Is there any way of determining, because it says building permits issued, it doesn't say building permits applied for. So is there any way that we can determine if there was any impact on building permits being issued during that period of time?
I can look into that. I'll reach out to our Department of Inspections and Permits. Certainly at the start of the pandemic, the entire county was scrambling to figure out how do we work remotely and do all of that. I can speak for Office of Planning and Zoning. I feel like our office pivoted pretty quickly. I will reach out though to Inspections and Permits and see what they may have to say about that.
Thanks, Patrick. Sorry to slow us down, but thank
That's
you for reviewing that.
I would just say, I don't know specifically about Anne Arundel County, but because I serve on the board of a large national public home builder, and there was a little bit of a slowdown in the early part of 2020 as everybody was kind of adjusting to the shock. But I would say by middle of that year, both people who were able to, like you said, Patrick, pivot and kind of figure out getting online. And then we know that demand has just been extraordinary up until the last couple of months. So we've had 2 big years of extreme demand. So I would think that maybe a little bit of that's attributable to it, but I think the lower numbers probably just land availability and choices and pricing would be my guess. I had a different question, if we could pivot relative to what you had put up in terms of some of the important goals of the 2040 plan.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we have this and I haven't really paid enough attention to it, but what are the current tools that the county has and that are using to be able to encourage and create an environment that those goals can be achieved? There are special things that they're doing in terms of zoning and in terms of having flexibility in zoning, in terms of allowing density, in terms of having some kind of requirement for the provision of, whether it's senior or affordable housing?
Yeah, so a lot of the specific strategies that when I've been sending out the background information to you all, I've included the goals and the policies, but underneath each of those policies, there tend to be 3, 5, 7 very specific strategies for implementation. And some of those do relate to a lot of the programs that Erin Karpowitz came and talked about, that her office is working on, Arundel Community Development Services. So, whether it's some of those home buyer programs or the funding sources that they're going after to help provide affordable housing or maintain or whatnot. There are some specific other specific programs and code revisions that are referenced within the strategies under Plan 2040. And have I shared with you all the first annual implementation report from Plan 2040, where we actually go through all of those strategies and list what's the status of implementation of those individual strategies? Has that been shared with you all yet? Or if it's not ringing a bell, then
I don't think so.
Okay, I'm gonna make sure that I share that with you all, because I think that would be an interesting thing to dig into and start to see some of those very specific strategies countywide that will address not just housing, but all of these topics that we're talking about, and see where we are with beginning to implement some of those 1 year in.
So that would be helpful. But so, for example, I've had the opportunity, the pleasure of building some affordable housing in Montgomery County, Fairfax County, Virginia. But in terms of new housing, they both have, affordable dwelling unit provisions in their zoning that, have a requirement to provide that, certain standards, and the way they incent developers for that is they give them extra density. So if you're looking for X regular market rate houses, you'll still get that, but in addition, you'll provide X number of affordable units. Is there something like that that's available? I wasn't aware that the county had that, or is that something that's worth talking about? Or
So we do have provisions for additional density within the Parole Town Center. Not within the other parts of the region. Again, I can't speak to the city, but there are provisions for having developers, if they proffer something like affordable housing, as well as other types of amenities. It's not just affordable housing, and it's not a requirement. But there are through what's called the incentive program provisions where you can gain additional density or other modifications from some of the other regulations within the Parole Town Center to get additional density in exchange for those things.
Patrick, that the City of Annapolis has a MPDU, moderately priced dwelling unit program in place, and I think it changes for rental product is, I think, maybe 10%, and for sale is a different percentage. I don't recall the numbers, but I think it'll be interesting to have Eric talk to that, because what they're finding in the city is that the program isn't all that successful. They're not finding takers for the set aside pieces they have. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe they're not, close enough to where they need to be with the numbers, or, maybe there's not demand in the areas where the development is happening. But it's interesting. It's in place, but it doesn't seem to be working well. So we should be looking at that.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear the why, because I've heard that as well, and it would be interesting to understand that. So
Leo, could you give a little more detail on that? What do you know what the city benefits are, or what the benefits are from this program?
Yeah, so what we're finding is that, let's say you do 100-unit development in the city, and you're required to have 10 of those units at, at an affordable rate, or, a low moderate income rate. And so you do a building of, units that you're going to rent for $3,000 a month, and then there's 10 in there that are going to be at, $1,400 a month.
Mhm.
But they just don't seem to be finding people to take them, particularly on the for sale product. And again, I just don't know why that is, but.
They don't find developers building it, they don't find the developers.
The developer's required to put it in place, but they're not finding people who want the units. So they're, they're expensive to build, and you're required to, it used to be you were only required to keep those for a certain amount of time. And if they weren't taken, then they could turn back over to market rate. But now the city is requiring them to be like kind of in perpetuity for those kind of lower moderate income things. So, yeah, we should probably have Eric talk more to it, because he'll.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, because look, there's not that many 100-unit properties in Annapolis. Right? You've got Maris
Exactly.
in the city. You've got the Eastport disaster, which is just never getting built.
I wouldn't bet on that, but go ahead.
I mean, look, I hope so, right? But 7 years, it just shows you the history there. But like, where else is that actually? I'm just trying to understand like which property.
Well, it's an example. Anything that has over 10 units is required to have the 10% set aside. So.
Got it. So
any
any
do a
new
14-unit one, you do 2 of them, let's say.
So any new construction, we know there's that the affordable property, came up on West Street behind Dunkin' Donuts. There's like the argument about the affordable property now about the aesthetic of it on Forest Drive.
Right.
That's not, I'm just not sure like how many there actually are. What I do know from my side, it'd be interesting if the county could comment on this, Patrick, is I know the city is trying to annex more property. And I'm not sure if I have properties, if I want to be annexed by the city or I don't. My sense is no, because city taxes are much higher. City politics is much worse. Getting involved in like these city arguments on properties such as Eastport is much harder than being in the county. But it'd be interesting to look at, from a developer's point of view, city versus county.
Leo, I have a question. When you're talking about these units, I assume you're talking about units that require some type of monthly maintenance or homeowners association or something of that nature. And for those that set aside units, I'm assuming there's no break in utilities or whatever the monthly fees may be. Do you sense that there's any adverse reaction to that? Because if they can't afford the full cost of the unit, can they afford the full cost of the maintenance? Thanks.
Oh, it's a great question. I know the utilities aren't discounted from the jurisdiction as far as I know, but I don't think BG&E reduces rates for people in those situations, but I'm not sure how they handle like upkeep costs for like homeowners associations. I'm not sure if that's discounted or not, but if it isn't, that could be part of the problem. I mean, that could definitely be a big part of the problem, because sometimes those rates are quite high.
So this is my experience. Again, I have not built affordable rental. I've done affordable for sale. Again, not in the county, in Montgomery and Fairfax. They have county agencies there that have lists of people who meet all the criteria to be able to go into those, and so you have frankly an infinite demand of people who will be able to afford them that get vetted by the county. And so I don't know whether the city has that or not, or maybe the way it's set up in the city, the economics don't work. But I have seen it work.
Yeah, Larry, you're right, and we see that here on my side. We have some affordable, not affordable per code, but just market rate affordable. So brand new renovated 2 bedrooms, $1,400 places in parole. We just had 2 come up for rent, and we literally got like 65 hits on these. Yeah. It was like we just had to shut it off and just rent. So I mean, that demand is definitely here in Annapolis, and we are investors in affordable properties nationwide, and exactly what Larry's saying, there's lists from each city and county that you just go to,
Mhm.
at least the private market has this, that you just go right down the list with the local housing association and just give the next one up.
Yeah, some of it may also have to be how we frame what we're defining as affordable, right? So there's obviously a variety of levels of that. If you're talking about workforce housing, teachers, emergency response folks, that you're looking, and if you have I don't know what the median income in the county is, but it's around $100,000, give or take. And so generally, if you're looking at 80% of the median, that's a household of $80,000 a year, which is still, and then you could be looking at 60%. But generally, my experience is that if you're in the 70 to 80% range, you can probably do it, from a market point of view without ever having any other kind of subsidies. As you get below that, if you're talking about hitting a target of 50% of median income of 40, then you're going to need some kind of additional, whether it's, county, state, or federal help. Jonathan, you might be able to speak to that better than I can. But again, as you're thinking about affordable, there's all different buckets of that too.
And Linda, I'll just chime in here just to say that in terms of housing choice vouchers, which is what we call them for attainable housing here in Baltimore County, there certainly is a list. There are thousands and thousands of people on that list. When you apply for that program, there are income verifications, and then there are also programs available for utilities. So Housing Choice Vouchers has the fuel assistance program through BGE, through the state. So there are some programs for utilities if the tenants do need those.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, I think one of the things that I talk to the people at the city pretty regularly, so I'll ask some more pointed questions about why that is or isn't working in for them, as well as maybe it should, and I can bring that back to the group and just share what I hear when we talk to them. If we can't get Eric to talk about it when he's here, but again, he'll probably talk some more about it in September.
So I want to talk about senior housing. And I thought that whole discussion about the schools and the school redistricting and so on was very interesting, because the reality is that if you look at what most, a senior trend is to have mixed housing so that people are living with all different age groups. And in this area, in our region, we have a lot of 55+ communities because the developers could get those they could get the zoning because they didn't have to provide school buses, anything else. So the 55+ community has been kind of isolated. And if you look at townhouses, if we try to integrate them into the community, we have a lot of townhouse communities going up, and those don't work for older people or people with disabilities. Most of these townhouses are 3 and 4 stories, and that just doesn't work. So I'd like to really look at the zoning. And I sent some information to Desiree and Patrick that AARP has put out. And they're saying that the #1 change that needs to be made in communities to have people really be able to age in place is changing the zoning laws. So that if we have a resident or have a commercial property, we could have it rezoned to have a whole lot of housing. So people can walk to their housing, they can walk to their transportation. They have housing that's all on one floor, all sorts of things that seniors need. And to compound that, the other issue I have is the environment. And my question is, if we talk about opening up more development in this region, are we talking about knocking down more trees, or are we talking about just redistricting or redoing areas that already have vacant buildings, that have underutilized buildings and so on? So you combine those two things, and those are the areas where we could have commercial and residential and not knock down more trees and address the needs of both families and, young single people and elderly people. So that's my concern.
If I can say, speaking to your second point regarding the environment, Plan 2040 was pretty clear about setting as a countywide framework, really focusing on focusing more on redevelopment and absorbing growth in areas that are already built, and really redeveloping our underutilized spaces and preferencing that over development of our green spaces. So knocking down our forests and redeveloping that. So I suspect that our Region 7 plan will need to continue in that vein. So I think we'd really be looking at things like Parole Town Center, where what kind of redevelopment are we looking to have happen there, or in other commercial areas within the region, and making sure that those areas are redeveloped over our forested areas and green spaces.
So are those areas zoned properly to redevelop, or does that need to happen?
Parole Town Center is Parole Town Center has there's a draft master plan that's already been worked through and in place, which really emphasizes a lot of the things that I've heard from you all, the promoting mixed use development throughout, a vision for walkability and more urban types of development, and the idea that that area would absorb more of the growth area of or the growth potential for the region. Yes, so mixed use, there's a recommendation to allow for mixed use, including housing throughout that area. So if something like
What about the mall?
yes, I was going to say, if the mall came in for redevelopment, yes, they would be allowed. They're allowed currently to develop housing on that.
And what about all these little strip malls that are sort of semi-abandoned around the area?
So within Parole Town Center, yes, they would be able to develop housing. I think the question is some of these other commercial areas, like if we're talking about, I mentioned that Bay Ridge commercial area.
Patrick, maybe to make it easier already, could you put up that one map of the county that actually outlines the density areas? Remember we went through this last time, that show the areas that are promoted for additional density versus low density. And so that's some of the issue, is a lot of these smaller strip centers are in zones that are not meant to be developed. In the Annapolis area, at least from my view of this map, the only area for added density can be the Parole Town Center. You're going up to North County. That's it.
I'm not sure what map. Do you have it up on your screen? And would you?
I don't. It was some of the prep material that I went through for like the last meeting.
For the
it's just
housing.
one of those maps that just shows like there's like 7 or 8 different colors.
The development policy areas, I think you're talking about.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Yeah, let me.
And what I just posted in the chat to everybody, I was trying to upload pictures, but I'm not sure if we can upload pictures into the chat. Novaco is an affordable housing accounting firm that tracks all data. And so I uploaded the section 8 in the HUD limits. So everyone can kind of start to really get numbers around what affordable means by the affordable definitions, right? Which are government definitions, 30% of AMI, and how that backs into it.
I'm going to put in the chat the map that Jonathan was referring to. This is our development policy area map, and I do want to caution, this is not a zoning map. These are not zoning designations. These are policy areas that are just very broad and general. So in this area, if I can, I'll share my screen so that we're all looking at the same thing. So we have the peninsula policy area on the toward the end of the peninsula, and the policies there are generally, focused on making sure that we, acknowledge the environmental constraints of these waterfront areas and the tendency or the the limitation of a one primary corridor in and out for this area. The city is grayed out and is not a part of this policy area. Neighborhood preservation policy area in beige. The types of policies that we're looking at for development there are really to be consistent and respect the existing communities there. That doesn't mean that there can't be neighborhood commercial nodes that are in scale with the surrounding community. That doesn't mean that there can't be commercial or industrial or anything. We're talking about really preserving the existing communities in those areas. And then the town center and transit-oriented overlay area in this within the Parole Town Center
But
area.
Patrick, look, in reality, right, from the development side, the challenge, affordable housing does have more operational costs and control to it to make sure that you're complying with all regulations. So to amortize those costs, you need a substantial number of units. We've analyzed this countrywide. The number really is like 50 units plus to make it worth your while going for lighted credits, going for the state and working with federal government. So when I'm looking at that map, I'm just looking at thinking, where can you drop 50 units? Because these communities won't allow that to happen. That's fine. That's just the way it is. But we really do need to think about this, right? In terms of making this work for everybody, because we've seen it happen. No one's going to develop if they can't return money to their investors, or pay off their debt, right? Just not going to happen. And so where can you drop 50 units in this? If you actually expand this map out more, you can definitely do it up towards, North County and definitely West County. But, we all know where all the growth is, right? It's Annapolis and it's South County, and nothing here is allowing that to happen.
Well, it seems to me that you're seeing housing projects come up all around Annapolis that aren't in the city. I mean,
exactly, and those aren't affordable. The challenge is these are like
they're not affordable. No,
cookie cutter monsters at $600,000 to $1 million. It's great to have that in the county, but we're not solving. I need my employees need a place to live that's close here, right? As do all the restaurants and bars, and we're not solving this problem at all. In fact, it's just getting worse because housing stock's decaying while Annapolis is getting better. It's driving more demand with less supply.
well, I guess what I'm saying is that we're seeing development all around Annapolis for market rate housing.
Exactly.
And that seems to be, there seems to be more of it now than there has been in the last few years from what I can see. And it'd be great to see those numbers because there seems like there's a lot under construction or underway in the approval process right now. But you're right, what we're not seeing is anything at critical mass that's affordable or even moderately priced. I mean, I don't see any of it. And I think it's because it's really hard for developers, A, to get to critical mass, and B, development costs right now are very high, and then C, there's an awful lot of opposition to that type of development. I mean, especially around Annapolis, there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest in solving that problem, to be honest. And it is a problem because we can't find people, there's restaurants opening as we come out of the pandemic, and I know of 3 that have opened in the last couple of weeks in Annapolis, and they're really struggling to find people who can work in those restaurants. And part of it is because there's no way for them to live close by. I mean, it involves a long car ride at $5 a gallon for fuel. I mean, that moves the needle for a lot of people. So, I mean, that's the key, is figuring out how to get the density in these areas where we've already got development. And the only way to do that is to A, go up, and B, to give some relief on the parking requirements. Because right now they're based in numbers that are, you just can't do it. I mean, you can't meet the parking requirement, without making some changes to how stringent they want to be about those things.
But
So where do we stand on ADUs at this point? Where do we stand on ADUs? I know that one of our speakers said they were going to be talking to.
Priscilla, it's so minimal. If you talk to people in the city, I mean, it's 20 a year, 30 a year. It's
not even that. It's like 5 a year.
There you go. It's minimal. Yeah, Leo, you said it best. Exactly. It's nothing.
So if they open it up to the county, you don't think that would make a big difference?
It just doesn't move. The numbers are just too small. I mean, I like the idea of it, if your parents need a place to stay and they're, or your kids come home and you have a spot to put them in a second dwelling on the property, I think that's great. And I think it helps a certain segment, but it's not enough. It's not nearly enough. It's like, that would be the smallest piece of the puzzle to fix, in my opinion. I think it's important, but it just isn't, like if I was targeting what's the most important one, that one is a rather small one, in my opinion.
Well, one of the advantages is for seniors aging in place, as people have limited income. But also, I was thinking it certainly would address some of the service workers' problems. You could have college students living in these ADUs in people's homes, and then they could work at the restaurants. I mean, it might be a tiny piece, but I think it's a significant piece. And I know, I don't understand why what happened with it at the council. I know it was introduced and then it went nowhere. And then I guess Lisa's going to reintroduce it. Does anybody know the status?
I don't know the status of whether it's going to be reintroduced or not. You are talking about the accessory dwelling unit bill?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if or when that will necessarily be reintroduced, but that is an area that we can make some recommendations in our plan. And I think this will come up again when we're talking about land use throughout the region and actually looking at a map. Where are we comfortable with? We looked at, and if you look at that visual vocabulary where we talked about or showed some images of accessory dwelling units, whether it's a detached garage that is a dwelling unit for somebody, or whether it's duplexes that look like single family homes within a single family neighborhood, are we comfortable with those kinds of things? And if so, where and to what degree are we comfortable with making a recommendation to look at our zoning code and allow for those sorts of things? Because they're not allowed in a lot of places currently.
And what about changing the zoning in the 55 plus, if they do that whole school change to allow people under 55 to move into those communities, because the schools are going to be redistricted?
Is that so? What are your thoughts on that? Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
So again, one of the things that we have a lot of 55 plus communities in our region. And as I understand it, it's because the developers could build those without having an impact on the schools. So the speaker who talked about school redistricting looked at all the, the actual vacancies and so on, and redistricting all the students. If you start opening up the 55 plus communities to anybody, to families, then you're now making, because a lot of the houses in the 55 plus are more affordable houses. And they could move in there and have more affordable housing and have buses to take their kids to school. And then you start developing more mixed communities.
Priscilla, I understand what you're saying, but if I were an individual who moved into a 55 plus because that was the type of community I wanted to live in, I would be a little appalled if it was going to change. So I would be curious as to what the majority of people feel, not just what AARP is recommending. So
No. And AARP is not saying to change those communities. That's me saying, do we want to look at that? And I would not do it without the approval of the communities. I live in one of those communities, and I don't know how people would vote for it. But what if they said, yeah, we would prefer to have this be an open community. We moved here because it was affordable and because all the housing was on, primarily on one floor, so people could access everything. I lived in a townhouse in Arnold, and it was a 4-story townhouse. That was bizarre. When I broke my feet, I couldn't walk up and down the stairs. So I had to move to a 1-story. So give the communities the option, but right now it's not an option because of the whole issue with schools.
Well, Patrick, isn't the development area around Pearl, isn't that exempt from the requirements for
APF.
Yeah.
APF? I'm sorry, APF
For
yeah.
schools within
Yeah.
the Pearl Town Center, and with certain conditions. I think it has to be a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment or a certain percentage. I don't remember off the top of my head, but there are several stipulations.
Right. So I brought that up because I wanted to just kind of speak to Priscilla's comment. I think there are ways to mitigate the requirement for these, the connection to schools. It sounds like there's empirical evidence that says that, development isn't the problem for the school districts, and they're looking to change that as was explained to us at the last meeting. But also, we can make recommendations as a group to say, we're not sure that should be a requirement for providing, mixed use housing that can serve, a broader range of age people. Because I think there is a segment of the market where, people don't just want to live with people just like them. They want to live with a broader spectrum of people, because sometimes, an older population could provide, interim care for working moms, that kind of thing. And so that would be kind of a nice thing to have across a larger range of demographics for these developments, and segregating them, like you said, to where, it's over 55 just seems like a really bad model to me, unless people want it. I mean, some people will want it, but I think it would be better if there were more opportunities to do it in a different way.
And Priscilla, I'd highlight one other thing that you said earlier. You said briefly walkability in these communities, and I do think, for a lot of reasons, that's something that I hope that this plan would really endorse is investments in walkability in our communities and places to walk to, not just sidewalks in a residential community, which that's important as well, but even, do we want to consider making sure that neighborhoods have somewhere nearby low scale commercial nodes and service nodes that are, in keeping with the character of the surrounding community, but allow for places where people can walk to and meet some of their day-to-day needs, in a way, and providing connections from our residential areas to those types of places.
Someone mentioned when we were earlier in the discussion about the semi-abandoned strip centers that we have in our area, and I can think of a few that seem like they're less than great in certain areas. I think there's a few along Forest Drive, and there's probably many others that I don't know, but in some cases those strip centers are really good hubs of activity, and are working pretty well. I mean, I can think of ones like where in Eastport, the Eastport Shopping Center, there's a lot of businesses there that people use every day, and a lot of services. And so I just wonder, like those nodes, like you were talking about, Patrick, I think those do become important to walkability, because people can get the things and get products and services there that they don't have to get into a car for.
As long as they're developed with those pedestrian connections, and we're able to get to them on foot or on bike, and not required to get into a car to use them.
Yeah, but there's the tension again, going back to the Eastport Shopping Center, recognizing it's in the city, it's not in there. But that's a perfect example, right? It's crying for some level of higher development, including those services, keeping a lot of the services, including other things. It's a perfect place, in my opinion, to build housing. You could build affordable housing there. You could build senior housing there. Again, keeping part of that, but we all know the politics, And so I would be surprised if that didn't carry over, into the county. I think that's just the reality that we're looking at. And so the really kind of question is that if we feel strongly about that, what kind of recommendations would we make, not only for the greater parole center, but for those other smaller activity nodes in our region that you just showed? Do we make a statement saying, these deserve some attention, but to accomplish this kind of balance in terms of walkability, mixture of uses, some level of affordability, as well as having services there?
This is Tony. Could I speak for a second?
Yeah, go ahead,
And
Tony.
I've been fading in and out. I'm very sorry. Something wrong with my phone. The one thing that's very positive with what you're talking about with the city gets most of its tax base from residential housing because of not being able to tax federal, state, and county buildings that are in the Baltimore city, that are in the city. they lose a lot of tax base in churches.
Yeah.
Well, it just seems like we could be looking at, the traditional models we're seeing for zoning to separate all these things. And we've talked about this before too. And I think as we look at what we want to recommend, we should probably be considering how do we not separate these things as much as we have in the past and bring them together so that, it's not so rigorous. There's not the necessity for over 55 to be here and commerce to be here, and then low density, multifamily housing over here. I mean, I think it would be better if all that stuff started to happen in more close proximity to each other so that it does become walkable and starts to address issues with both transportation and walkability.
And I would like to hear from you all if you have ideas for places where in our region might we start to think about some of those areas. We've talked a lot about the Parole Town Center, but as I mentioned, there's a lot that's already in place in terms of policy and a regulatory environment that allows for mixed use and density and such in the Parole Town Center already. Are there other places within our region that we ought to be looking at? And maybe when we have these land use discussions at the start of the new year, I think is when we're programmed for some of those meetings. Where are some areas that we really need to drill down on and consider? And I don't have to have that answer from you right now, but be thinking about that and ready to talk about that.
So even if in fact you say that the whole parole area already has some pretty strong recommendations, it might be helpful for us to look at that and maybe just be able to reinforce it, right? Saying we agree. I don't know if that's part of our work or not, or just to have another voice that lends support to those plans.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the charter is to develop a region plan. But I can share with you the draft master plan for the parole area is online. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, I can share that with you all if you'd like to take a look at that. But I think it really follows very closely with a lot of what I'm hearing from you all.
I'd be very curious to know the demographics of the people who reside in the houses or the apartments at the parole center. Because everybody I know that has lived there or does live there is a young single person. I don't know whether that's the only demographic we're addressing. Are there any families? Are there any, seniors? I mean, what's the racial mix? Who lives there? Because it's very expensive.
It does tend to be very expensive. I think, I think that there are some seniors, fewer families probably in the Parole Town Center. Those are outlined in the demographics are outlined in the draft master plan. I'll share that with you and y'all can have a look at that.
Yeah, because I have a hunch that those price ranges, it's not going to be attractive to, continue to grow out that kind of a price range.
Right.
It's not.
Are any of those affordable? Were they required to put affordable housing in the existing Parole Town Center, large scale properties? Does anybody know?
I don't know the answer to that.
Not in the for sale. I don't know about the rental, but not in the for sale.
I'm not aware of any requirements. There is Claiborne Place, the high rise off of or on Riva Road near the festival at Riva, which is an affordable structure.
Patrick, back to some of Leo's comments, which I think were the most telling about 10 minutes ago. I mean, is there really any potential from the county to give on some of these parking requirements or some of these density requirements? Because if that answer is no, then I hate to say it, but a lot of this is just waste of time.
One of the recommendations in the draft master plan is for a parking study to answer that question in particular within the Parole Town Center. So to understand if we can reduce some of the parking requirements within the Pearl Town Center. So on that front, yes.
But what about like for example, if you pull your map back up, and I would like to go through this a little bit more. I mean, everything is restricted. Like we know the job centers are downtown Annapolis, people working at the academy, people working at the State House, people working at bars and restaurants. There's no more density coming in here. We know there's, huge economic actually growth and demand down in South County. That's all preserved. Arnold has a lot, but you can see there's nothing more allowed there. I mean, we do need to have like a realistic discussion about this. And so if we're not going to be able to build with any density, we're not going to be really changing. I mean, at the margin, sure, you're going to get 2, 4, 5, 10, 100 ADUs. That doesn't solve this problem. And ADUs don't work downtown. ADUs, are living there.
I think region 7, I feel like is a little bit different than region 4, which is this Severna Park, Broadneck, and Pasadena area, or region 2, which surrounds Fort Meade.
Mhm.
I think it is a little bit challenging. One, the city is kind of off the table. We don't, define policy within the city. And so within our region, it's the Parole Town Center that is the main, I think, targeted area for growth within region 7.
But there are plenty of developments going on right there now, right? Anyone can just drive down
Right.
the street. There's like the Beacon Place, the massive
Right.
project across from where US Internet Ring was. There's the big one coming down Riva Road. I mean, there is plenty of development, and it's obviously mostly going to be market rate. And because you're building at 2022 costs, you can just imagine what the rents will be and what the costs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, there's also the area near the mall. I mean, look, the mall is going to continue to evolve in terms of, what the American mall experience is
Mhm.
like. If you go in there, the vacancy rates are alarming. And
Yeah, it really could be incredible affordable housing. The mall
I
could be-
mean, they've got tons of land, they've got structured parking. What they don't have is vertical build there. It's all low rise kind of,
Right.
it's not really being a great custodian of the property. And,
Yep.
and so what I think we'll see is the redevelopment, like what a great opportunity. It's a transportation hub. It's close to a lot of other services, and you could just see that area turning into, mixed use, multifamily housing with structured parking right there. So Pearl Town Center certainly is what's happening in our region right now. And
It'd be
we all
fantastic. I mean, do we think there's a chance for the county to work with that property owner to move that forward?
well, it's changing hands right now. Westfield is selling everything in the
Yep.
States. So I
But are
think
there
that's-
buyers? Leo, are there buyers yet for it?
oh, I don't know. I think I just know I read in the paper that Westfield was selling everything.
But I
in
mean,
the
but Leo, the
States.
county could signal, right, their interest here, right? The county could put an article out, or a press release out about their interest in improving the residential usage for that area, which would be a big signal to any buyer that their zoning applications would not get caught in a 7-year back and forth like Eastport.
So that's, I think that comes full circle back to like what we're doing is,
Right?
That's,
if we
that's part
think
of our.
that that's an opportunity, the recommendation would be, let's look at ways when we get together and talk about zoning change, what's permitted there under current zoning and what a change to that zoning would allow to happen. Do we want, if we wanted to say that's a target for density to solve the ongoing, low and middle income housing problem, then we could set the zoning up to support that. I'm not sure you can target exactly who moves into it, but you could say there would be incentives like Patrick and Desiree have described for, you could get increased density if you were willing to provide a higher percentage of those types of housing units. And so what do those look like? I mean, because as you said, the critical mass here is, you need to get to enough units to make low income make sense or moderate income. So that's a nice target in my mind. I mean, I think there's a pocket over by at the other end of Bestgate that could also be looked at as infill development. So, and along the entire Bestgate corridor, it's kind of like there's a strip center and there's a couple real estate offices, but I think there are areas that would lend themselves to looking at that. And I think we should look at that when we get together and and decide where we think we might want to help increase the density. And there is other places no one wants to touch, right? Like, I don't think people want to add density at the end of the peninsula to provide more housing down there. I just don't think you'll get any support. So.
Mall just makes perfect sense. You know, the transportation hub, the stores, restaurants, it's just so underutilized. And we've talked about it from our very first meeting. We've talked about that mall every single time we talk about housing. And if that's not our number one focus, we're crazy, because the Parole Town Center, as you said, Leo, is already being developed. It's fine. It's going in the right direction, sort of.
Yeah,
Let's put our eggs in a different basket.
If you look at the chat, Patrick has just posted a link to the planning and zoning for parole. So so we should all take a look at that too and see what's coming there. You know, that's kind of like in the rearview mirror for us. We haven't seen it three-dimensionally yet, but I think a lot of that planning's done. So yeah, I think it's a great discussion. I mean, I think we just have to decide. What I'm hearing, which I think is really encouraging, is there's a lot of interest in this group to trying to address those problems, you know, trying to address low and middle income, you know, housing. And I think that would make us a better community here. So, you know, that's exciting to me. And so now we just have to figure out where we can best accommodate that. And as Patrick and Desiree said, you know, Region 7 is only one portion of Anne Arundel County, and other communities have similar problems, but we know what happens here in Annapolis, so we don't have that covered as well as we'd like to. And we also know that the continued policy of putting people of low income in developments that are, you know, kind of separate from the rest of the community is not a great answer. You know, it just doesn't, it seems to concentrate problems that, you know, I wonder if they weren't so concentrated in one spot from an income standpoint, if we could have a better community. So the mix of units, I think, would be really nice to look at. And so it just becomes, how do we write that? How do we get that to happen? And that's going to be kind of some of the recommendations I'm hoping we come to. Priscilla, you're muted. There you go. No, you're still muted.
I couldn't get back to my screen to unmute.
Oh,
Sorry.
there you go. There you go.
So I was just looking at the pictures of the new Riva construction, and every time I drive by that, I wonder what that is. And somebody just put a link that shows that it's going to be a bunch of shops. Is that correct?
Are you talking
So-
about 2510 Riva?
Is that the one right near 665?
Yeah, by the DoubleTree, in front of the DoubleTree Hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that going to have housing attached to it, or is that just shops?
I'm seeing so I pulled up what I know about that. A 7,000 square foot restaurant with outdoor seating, about 6,500 square feet of retail, and a grocery on that location. But just down the road at Beacon Square, which is across from Annapolis Town Center, that is a mixed use with about 500 apartments proposed, and then some retail along Riva Road. And further down Riva Road at Admiral Cochrane Drive, where there's construction going up there, at the rear of that 250 unit apartment building. And then what came in for and was approved was a 4-story office building fronting on Admiral Cochrane Drive, and then a small retail restaurant component fronting on Riva Road there. So those are the 3 big ones that are really underway right now.
But we don't know in terms of the ones that have the housing and the rental component. I would probably bet it's all going to be market rate.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. So there would have been no provision to allow something to be able to have any kind of affordability in there.
It's allowed, but it really is a thing.
Yeah,
that needs...
but the developer's not going to build to it if there's no economic
requirement.
incentive to do it.
Yeah. Or incentivized in some way.
Right.
Well, we've gone over our allotted time for today. I think we were set till 11. Is that right, Patrick?
Yeah, that was what I had put on the agenda.
Yeah. I think we've really covered a lot of ground today in terms of the discussion. And, I think this is going to be a continuing component as we figure out what direction we're going to try and steer the county to in terms of, our region. But I think for today, we should probably put a wrap on this and pick this up again when we get together and talk more about some of the other things we're going to cover. And also our transportation subcommittee will be making a report at some point in the next couple of meetings to tell you how we're making out with our research. So,
Hey, Leo, before, I just wanted to mention, I just put a link to, I was just taking some notes on our discussion on a Jamboard. So if folks have any more points they want to add, just you can do this after the meeting too. I didn't want to distract the conversation with me typing, but there are notes there if you want to add anything. So that'll be open after the meeting as well.
great. Yeah, I just pulled it up. Thanks for doing that. That's terrific. As I can tell that you're typing fast again. So thanks for all of that. Does anybody have any closing thoughts that they want to put out before we adjourn?
I just want to say
Yeah,
that
one-
I just wanted to say that I enjoyed the conversation today. I think we were very interactive, and I think it energizes the group. I appreciate that. And just want to comment for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Good.
Yeah. Priscilla, you said you look like you had something to say.
No, I was going to say, one of the things we have not discussed at all was modular housing as an option for high density, low and moderate income housing. And I just want to put that in our thoughts, that there might be, these big vacant parking lots that could be converted into some very nice modular housing.
Yeah, I know that there's modular home manufacturers. There's one up in Baltimore called Blueprint Robotics that's doing a bunch of multifamily stuff. I think most of it's in Philadelphia, but you might want to pop on their website and take a peek at how they're putting that together.
Tell me the name again.
It's Blueprint Robotics.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah,
I think it's a very viable, affordable option for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's funny. There are a lot of things that get in the way of that process of building here in the States. Inspectors want to see the wiring go in the wall. So, the model in Europe is you get the panel and you plug it into the next panel and it goes. And here in the United States, the inspection process isn't set up that way. So it's
That's an
amazing.
interesting perspective. Okay.
Yeah, you wouldn't know it until you've tried to do it, which we have.
Really?
And then
Uh-huh,
found out
right.
how difficult it is. So
Interesting.
yeah, that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
But anyway, you can take a look there and see what they do. It is very interesting. The building that we're in at my office was built by them as a modular construct, and the speed is really amazing. It can be. It wasn't in our case, but it can be. So with that, I'm gonna ask for a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Second.
Second, great. Well, thanks everyone for making time today. I know this was an extra meeting, but I thought it was a great one, and looking forward to talking to everyone again real soon. And Patrick and Desiree will keep us up to date on next meetings. I think it's September. Is that right? Or
No, the next one is August 23rd. We'll be
August
hearing
23rd.
from Recreation and Parks and Department of Aging and Disabilities. And I'm sure that they may continue some of the housing discussion or touch on it a bit as relates to some of their clientele. So
Great. Well, so with the motion and a second, we're going to adjourn. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll look forward to seeing them
Right.
at the next meeting.
y'all take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.